Our message to Florida Republicans is F around and find out.
A few moments later.
The Virginia State Supreme Court ruling the process to redraw that state's congressional maps is unconstitutional.
As if the redistricting wars could not get worse and more humiliating for Democrats, newsflash, it just got worse. Because after this week, we already watched a chain reaction of several red states actually getting off their butts for once and doing something, starting redistricting processes following the Supreme Court decision. We just got another huge ruling out of the Virginia Supreme Court that has now struck down the Democrat attempt at gerrymandering and the whole fake illegitimate referendum that they tried to pass last month. It's utterly hilarious because you may remember Virginia sort of incited the recent redistricting wars by saying we're going to add 4 to 5 Democrat seats. Florida responded. Then the Supreme Court finally ruled on that case, and so it's been this whole back and forth. But now not only did Virginia find out in the sense that, hey, following the VRA Supreme Court decision, there's a ton of southern states that are ready to get rid of gerrymandered DEI affirmative action Democrat districts. But guess what? It turns out your redistricting plan the entire time was illegal. This is something we told you about before. We sort of thought this would happen, but frankly, I'm a little bit surprised at the speed of it. I was more so expecting that maybe we would be able to run out the clock on Virginia Democrats. They wouldn't be able to settle these legal challenges before the primary date, but instead, no, the Supreme Court just came out today and struck it down altogether, effectively ruling that when the Virginia state legislature, the Democrats, set up the referendum that they put on the ballot, you may remember this was the whole thing about restoring fairness and the whole process was rigged from the start, that actually they broke several of their own state laws and parliamentary procedures, basically kept a special session open for 2 years and then restarted it, which you just can't do things like that, right? It's a bunch of boring parliamentary stuff, but long story short, Democrats rammed through that referendum on an illegal basis. And it's hilarious because right now, as Democrats just face a total wipeout when it comes to redistricting, now even worse, you're seeing a lot of them join in with this cope and seethe, basically saying, well, how come the Republicans get to redistrict? How come they get to add seats, but when we do it, it's illegal? I don't know. Ask your blue state Supreme Court. Maybe here's an idea. You know the difference between the red states and your state? It's called follow your own state law. You're the ones in charge of the government. It shouldn't be that difficult. But as it turns out, the very Democrats, this is so funny, who are lecturing us about democracy and the rule of law and blah, blah, blah. And look, when we did our redistricting, we did referendums, which means we gave power to the people. Whereas when you're elected state representatives through the generic means of what it means to actually have a republic and a representative government, set up their own plans and passed laws on behalf of the sovereign, that was somehow wrong. You shouldn't do that even though it's completely legal. Well, guess what? In the end, in the ultimate twist of irony, it was not us who was breaking the rules, who were breaking the laws. It was Democrats, and they found out as a result in the courts. Who tried to rig democracy, by the way? Who tried to break the laws, by the way? Nobody's above the law. I don't know. I'm just saying. But that said, guys, we'll get into it. This is just such a satisfying situation to watch. First Tennessee, Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, and now Virginia. They even lost there somehow. And by the way, consequences that it may have for the election are definitely noticeable. We'll talk about those as well. So first, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, so here is the headline out of today. The Virginia Supreme Court has now overturned the Democrat gerrymandering referendum, ruling that the highly rigged, corrupt, and broken process to put it on the ballot in the first place was actually unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court is now siding with the lower court, and this is interesting because in many of the legal cases leading up to the election day, the Supreme Court was keeping it in place. So honestly, I had my doubts. This is sort of a pleasant surprise. I wasn't sure if the Supreme Court would do this, especially this fast, but in a sort of reversal decision there, they're now saying, nope, it was actually unconstitutional. Take a listen.
It passed, but not by a lot, but it did pass. And it would have effectively, Democrats believe, made it 10-1 Democrats to Republicans. I think the current figuration is 6-5.
Right.
So this is thrown out. Is that the end of the line for now, Shannon?
It sounds like it, because this was an issue of the Virginia Constitution. It was a state law issue, and critics of this referendum have said from the beginning that Democrats were on thin ice because they did not follow procedures as outlined by state law and state constitution. And what the court ended up saying here is that violation irreparably undermined the integrity of the entire voting referendum, said it makes it null and void. And for that reason, they say the congressional district maps issued by the court in 2021, the old maps are the ones that they've got to use for the upcoming congressional election.
Yeah, so as you could expect, Democrats are whining and throwing a complete fit about this. They're saying, oh, well, that's not fair. How come the Republicans got to do it, but we didn't? Well, it's very simple, actually. It's called follow your own state law. Follow your state constitution. Be competent, and you might have been able to get this done, but you weren't. And frankly, thank God. Literally, we are so lucky that our opposition is this silly and dumb. And this is not something, frankly, that we should lose sight of. I know that in many ways, we're up against forces of evil, and it seems like a very neck and neck tough fight. But please also remember that these silly leftists, okay, they're not invincible. They're not some type of like immovable uniparty leviathan. We're not like a little guy fighting against the system. We are on equal footing with these people, okay? Don't have that attitude of defeatism, because as you can see, and we are so blessed to be in this position, the other side is not actually unbeatable. Why? Because they're actually in many ways completely incompetent. They don't know what the heck they're doing. Frankly, if they did, they would have figured out a way to actually get Trump off the ballot in the 2024 election instead of throwing these indictments at him and then losing a lot of the legal proceedings and getting him ultimately elected into the White House, as one example. Okay, so do not fall into the politics of demoralization. This, folks, is a prime reason why we can beat these people even in their own game, because they're just not that bright. By the way, as much as they want to complain about this while still claiming that they're protecting democracy or something like that, or fairness, right? That's literally what it said on the ballot, restoring fairness. I'd like to point out, too, that the Virginia Supreme Court is not actually some conservative supermajority or something like that, as perhaps Democrats would claim. As a matter of fact, it is basically the most right-down-the-middle centrist court that you will find in the entire country. It ranks 18th in terms of the most conservative Supreme Court, 18th most conservative in the country. On the flip side, that would be about 32nd most liberal in the country. And you might say, oh, so it leans slightly conservative. Well, I would remind everyone that there are actually more red states in this country than blue states. So yeah, actually, when you break it down, 18th is basically about the exact center of where a Supreme Court could be. Equal, balanced, and in this case, what did a very centrist Supreme Court rule? Actually, the partisan Democrats just completely broke the law, and they weren't allowed to do this. So you can whine about the right-wingers, you can blame the MAGA Republicans for sabotaging you, but ultimately, you ought only to look to yourselves and your own Supreme Court and your own state law. It really is that simple. You're the one here who's screwed up. And let's not forget, too, folks, just how arrogant these people were a couple of weeks ago. Now, bear in mind, they completely ignored the fact that their own referendum, despite the legal challenges, barely passed in the first place. It was not remotely alarming to these people that, wait, we just won Virginia by a massive margin back in November, and in this case, the GOP didn't even try, and we still almost lost. That there being the Democrats, they were calling on all the other states to join, and as a matter of fact, you may remember Hakeem Jeffries speaking to Florida and the red states looking to redistrict in response to Virginia. What did he say? Anyone remember this? F around and find out. Just a few weeks ago, Democrats were talking so tough on this issue, and I really have to wonder now, where is the tough guy rhetoric? Where is the swagger? Notice how all they're doing now is basically moaning and whining and mourning and complaining like little kids. It's the language of total defeat, but maybe there's truth in that. The Democrats actually know, as I've been trying to explain to people, if you don't think this stuff matters, no, it does, because just look at how pissed off and in some cases deranged, in other cases just totally defeated the left-wing response is to these redistricting wins for Republicans, and I think that'll tell you everything you need to know about how vital this issue actually is. But again, to Hakeem, what happened? F around and find out, right?
Our message to Florida Republicans is F around and find out. If they go down the road of a DeSantis dummy mander, the Florida Republicans are going to find themselves in the same situation as Texas Republicans, who are on the run right now.
Yeah, well, update. It was indeed not us who effed around and found out. It was you. It was Virginia Democrats. We warned you too, by the way. Actually, let's go all the way back. I said last summer that if Democrats want to get into a redistricting back and forth war with one another, that so long as Republicans hold their ground, Republicans are going to win. They're going to prevail and come out with more seats. Why? Because, again, there are actually more red states in this country than blue states. And secondly, geography doesn't favor Democrats nationwide. And when you look at the 2020 census, Democrats already gerrymandered very close to their ceiling. There was not a lot they had left to do. And especially with the Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act, the floor is basically open for Republicans now. There's very little actually that Democrats can do in response to substantially or meaningfully challenge it, which is exactly why they're panicking, which is exactly why yesterday they're basically left with no choice other than to try to stage a January 6th copycat style event at the Tennessee State Capitol, because these people are SOL. They're straight out of options. And you are even seeing some calls from prominent leftists to basically just softcore endorse violence, like directly now. Shouldn't be very surprising, by the way, because we know this is very, common within the nature of the left. It's a rather mainstream belief among their coalition these days to support political violence. But the reaction, folks, to them losing a couple of congressional seats is really that bad. It's that serious to them, which maybe to a degree shows how serious it should be to us as well, right? That we can actually beat them very effectively, politically speaking, using simply drawing fair congressional maps that are not gerrymandered for DEI, outdated civil rights laws or something like that. But here's what, for example, Hassan Piker had to say, and it's a crazy comment, but I'm going to show you just to demonstrate the average left-wing reaction. They're actually so mad about losing a redistricting war and having broken their own, constitution and getting caught for it, that they're now threatening violence. Okay, here's what Hassan Piker says. The Virginia Supreme Court denied the results of the redistricting referendum. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and Tennessee carved up the last Democrat district, destroying black voting power in the state. And then he goes on to, never mind the fact that, first of all of these things are within the law. The Virginia Democrats broke the law. That's why they got struck down. The Supreme Court ruled, they're the highest court in this land. They made a valid ruling on the Voting Rights Act, which is racial discrimination actually is a bad thing, right, leftists? So you shouldn't draw districts on the basis of race. Oh, wait, apparently leftists like that for some reason, just because it helps Democrats win. And lastly, as it pertains to Tennessee, redistricting, they're doing what? Representing the will of their voters. It's a Republican state. So this is actually, all of these things are in reality the so-called democracy that leftists claim to worship so much. But obviously, of course, when quote-unquote democracy doesn't go their way, they literally immediately resort to calling for violence. I mean, I'm not exaggerating that all whatsoever. Lose an election, something doesn't go your way. The majority, by the way, rule from the people. The people actually disagree with you. Well, clearly we need to start committing violence against the people. Like, that's actually what the leftists are all about. But who should be surprised? These people in reality are violent revolutionary communists. Whatever they want to call themselves, that is simply the actual fact. And when you look at just how many different things in society they claim justify violence, it's almost as if it's not really the thing that is important, whether that's redistricting or healthcare or Charlie Kirk being a quote-unquote fascist or something like that. No, in reality, they're just Marxists who want a violent revolution. They want to overthrow the country, overthrow the government. And whatever the current issue of the day is basically their excuse, You might think on the surface, okay, Democrats lost like 10 congressional seats. They claim they're going to win the midterms in a blue wave anyway. What's the issue here? But, I don't know, something to consider there. But yeah, that's what he had to say. So he goes on to state, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable, which sounds to me like a pretty terroristic threat. Not exactly sure why this guy is allowed to say stuff like that on a public platform, clearly insinuating, by the way, given his past track record of all the type of other violent things he said, he clearly knows the point that he's trying to get at here. And, I think it's pretty obvious. He can sit there and play dumb. Oh, I'm just playing analysis or something. But Hassan, we've seen the rest of what you said. We can put two and two together. We kind of understand the insinuation you're trying to make here, especially given the way you've reacted to many past different cases of your own type of people committing that very violence. And so, that's of course what's going on. But yeah, he's still going to have a platform all over the place, and people are just going to view him as a generic left-wing figure. Prominent Democrats now on the election cycle and the campaign are continuing to campaign with this guy, having them speak at the rallies and stuff. So, please understand, this violent, terroristic supporting lunatic is indeed a top figure of the Democrat Party. In many ways, you could call him an ambassador and a spokesperson of the party, and that's, the reaction he's having to this. So just take notes of that. On one hand, it's very easy to laugh at it, like they're this mad about it. At the same time, it's not really funny, because we know these are not just empty words. No, the left just does this stuff in the real world on a quite regular basis. And if you're perhaps wondering maybe why they view this as so existential, well, I'm sure, going back to the conversation of the midterms here, you've heard a lot of talk in recent weeks and months even about how this is going to be a blue wave. It's a total wipeout. It's going to be horrible. Look for Trump and Republicans. And sure, like gas prices, maybe the Democrat voter base being energized because of ICE and all that. Those are factors. Yeah, historically, you're right. It's typically not favorable for the incumbent party going into the midterms. That's not a Trump issue. That's a every single president issue. So this is all true, right? In many ways, you could say Republicans are the on-paper underdog in terms of the House of Representatives. However, I also want you to pay attention to the math, because nothing even we've seen in recent weeks appears to indicate that Democrats are headed into the blue wave that they believe they are. Because, for example, we look at the crystal ball 2026 House ratings after the Virginia redistricting got struck down, which of course nets Republicans 3 seats. That's 3 new seats across the South. Democrats lose 4 because they won't be able to do their Virginia plan. Well, that now leaves Republicans at 211 congressional seats, Democrats at 208, right? So we actually come in with the inherent advantage, and it will be just 16 toss-up seats that will basically decide control of the House of Representatives. Keep in mind, it's, I believe, 218 to have a House majority, right? 218 to win, which means, folks, out of 16 toss-up seats, we would only need to win 7 out of 16, that's less than 50%, to retain the House of Representatives. That math actually, when you break it down, even if it's a general blue wave, maybe a Democrat favorable electorate, is far from impossible to reach. That's actually very doable in a sense. And let's even say hypothetically, Democrats win all 16 toss-up seats, and so that would leave them at 224 congressional seats. Folks, I'd point out, by historic margins, that is not a large majority at all whatsoever. I mean, sure, technically they would win, but that would be a very similar blue trickle to what we saw in 2022. That's the type of election Democrats would even look at and likely say, okay, I'm happy we won the House, but did we really win by that much? Is this really a resounding Democrat mandate? And the answer there would be no. And, that's part of what is also important, is that we want to win, but by the way, even if we don't win, the second important thing would be denying Democrats a mandate. If they barely eke out the House with all the momentum they think they have going on their side, let me just put it this way, they're probably still going to try to impeach Trump and do all those things, but it makes it harder, right? Because basically the margin by which you win elections decide the amount of political capital you have. You ever heard of that term? That's basically sort of your moral mandate, your majority, your consensus that, hey, the people voted for us, they want to get things done. If it's a narrow race, a narrow, close House race, which it appears like it's going to be, the Senate map still is rather favorable for Republicans, then, again, I'm not sure this election actually is going to go the way Democrats think it is, okay? That's not me confidently saying Republicans are going to retain both chambers. As I said, we're probably the underdogs going into the House, even with this favorable math. But It's totally reachable. It's totally possible. By the way, all these reasons are, you put together factors why you cannot sit out the midterms, okay? You, first of all, need to observe the behavior of Democrats and leftists and understand, do not give these people power. Do not give Hassan Piker, the Supreme Court made a completely valid decision, therefore people are going to start resorting to violence or something. Yeah, we can't let those people win. We can't let the people who celebrated the assassination of Charlie Kirk win. This stuff is all true. But then secondly, I would say further, do not fall for the demoralization ops, because nothing is over till it's over, right? I didn't hear no bell. We are months away from the election. Very hard to say what will happen, or even what the national environment will be. But again, even despite all the demoralization propaganda, I repeat, please look at this math. It's not impossible. It's totally doable. Like, we have to win less seats than they do, even less toss-up seats than they do to win the House, guys. 7 out of 16 toss-ups. That's all we theoretically need. It's possible, okay? It's not something I frankly think we should rule out whatsoever. But anyways, guys, there you have it. The news continues to get worse. By the way, this is largely why Democrats are so pissed off. Guess what? They now have to play fair. Right? They're suddenly realizing, we kind of got caught gerrymandering our own states, but basically blocking Republicans from doing the same. Now that sort of the beast is unleashed, and now that congressional maps have to be drawn a lot more representative of the actual states and the people who live in those states. Oh no, guys, why is the House still so difficult for Democrats, even though we're supposed to have a blue wave here? Yeah, maybe it's because, as I've been saying before, by the way, the entire Democrat structure and supposed mandate of control in this country is fake. It's not actually real. This party's not as popular as they claim to think it is, right? This idea that, the kind of idea we have in our heads of the power balance in America, the 50-50 split between Democrats and Republicans, in many ways, that's not actually reflected by reality, right? It's been that way because of the fact Democrats are allowed to gerrymander so aggressively through the Voting Rights Act. That's no longer a thing. The Southern Republican states are no longer basically nerfed, inherently handicapped against the blue states. Now they're on equal playing fields. Blue states, by the way, were already gerrymandering extremely extensively. Look at Illinois as some examples. And now that system's kind of coming undone, you wonder, why does the House seem so close? I thought Democrats are supposed to win. Because that's the actual country, Democrats, right? The party of democracy. This is the actual country. The country's not as left-wing as people always make it out to be. But of course, when they have a rigged system effectively that works in their favor, they can sit there and pretend, we have this huge mandate. No, you don't. And frankly, you never did. You never did. But, welcome to a fairer world finally. So there you have it. Democrats could have, again, avoided this situation had they been competent, but thank God they are not. That said, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.